Hello, my name is Daniel Guiney, a teacher of history here in Nase Pudong in Shanghai, and I'm currently working on exploring theory of knowledge. And in this video, I'll be thinking about woks, or ways of knowing. And I thought rather than write what would be a pretty discursive post, I'll just do some video diaries for this week instead. They will probably be just as rambling, but I hope you get something out of them, and with a bit of luck they might stimulate some discussion. So the first wok I want to consider is language, and how it can affect our personal and shared knowledge. So the way I will go about this is by breaking it into three different sections. Firstly, I'll explain why language appeals to me in the first place as a wok. That's quite a personal section. Secondly, probably the bit that might interest some of you the most is by exploring some of the ways in which I think language affects our knowledge. And thirdly, by considering some possible future implications. So, section 1. Why does this appeal to me? Well, the most obvious reason it resonates with me right now is I've got a 7-month-old daughter who's very beautiful and lovely. My wife and I have taken great delight as she's gone from newborn to babbling infant, and I've been reading up about speech development and language in infants. So certainly not an expert, but I know a lot more than I used to, about how babies go from the stage of learning phonemes like a, t, ch, sh, and so forth, to developing up to 100,000 morphemes. So instead of a and t, which are the phonemes, at would be the morpheme. So they connect them together. So I'm a new dad, and like many of you, you might have gone through it already. It's very, very cool. She sounds a bit like a dinosaur right now, to be honest. And I don't think I could identify her voice from 100 other babies if I closed my eyes. But I'm fascinated by how her spoken language will develop. She's being raised by, just for a bit of context, she's being raised by parents of different nationalities. I'm British and my wife's from the Philippines. And to throw something else in the mix, she's being raised here in Shanghai, in China, a language that neither myself nor her mother speak very well at all. Literally, I can say please and thank you. Lazy, I know. I did a bit of Googling before preparing for this wok video, and apparently there are 616,000 words in the Oxford English Dictionary. And I'm excited to see how over time my little girl will pick up on some of these, move her lips to aspirate, and create meaning through her language. In short, convey her own language to us and to the world through speech. Okay, speech is my first form of language, not the only one. We're still waiting on the first word, alas, but there's a fascinating debate out there which I recommend you look at between Noam Chomsky, who believes language is effectively innate, and B.F. Skinner, who believes it comes about through learning and exposure. So, will my daughter grow up to sound like her mum, who's from the Philippines, or her British dad? Or will there be some Chinese picked up from the playground in there? This, therefore, is one big reason that I'm excited to investigate language today as a way of knowing, or a wok. In short, to link this back to TOK, how will my child's language shape the way she thinks and the knowledge she receives and gives out? Secondly, I'm English. I once saw a child write the name of my country, Great Britain, in a history exercise book as Grape Written. And I've had the good fortune to be raised by an Irish father, to be married to a Filipino national, to have lived in Singapore, in Egypt, and presently China. So a big linguistic melting pot. There are many grammar Nazis where I come from who think the Queen's English is the only acceptable form. Yet when I was in Singapore, I learned the beauty of Singlish and how it differs to English. The same applies to my time elsewhere. There are 7,000 languages in the world. Again, thank you, Google. And all of these spoken and written communications have significant impact on how we learn. So it's a combination of my own personal life experiences, plus being a new dad to a babbling little baby, that have made me want to discuss my thoughts on language as a wok with you all today. So thank you for putting up with that first section. But you know a bit about me and why I'm interested in language. And having established my personal reasons for interest in this topic, I'll now proceed to look at some of the ways in which I think language affects our knowledge. And this is the bit that I hope will interest you the most, so sorry about the preamble. So section 2, how language affects knowledge. Right, this is the most rambling section, so you might want to pause it or go on YouTube, and I'll put some links in and pictures. But if you get a chance, there is an amazing TED Talk by a cognitive scientist called Lera Boroditsky on TED Women on YouTube. She points out a number of truly fascinating observations. For example, she references an Aboriginal group in the USA. An Aboriginal group in Australia who communicate by directions on a compass, rather than simply saying left or right or forwards or backwards. Were I to speak to somebody from that background, it would be exceedingly hard for me, and I'm sure most of you, to understand what on earth they were talking about if you asked them where you left your car keys, for example. Likewise, she illustrates that in Russia there are two words for blue, whereas I might say navy blue or sky blue or dark blue. In Russia they have two words for two different shades of blue, and within that they then break it down even further. And research has revealed, according to Boroditsky, that Russians are faster to identify shades of blue than other nationalities because of their language. She also talks about the use of feminine and masculine nouns in languages, an issue I don't think we have in English. But in Germany, a bridge is feminine, and in Spain, a bridge is masculine. And as a result, Germans are more likely to attribute feminine associated words when describing such a structure, such as beautiful, whereas Spaniards tend to call bridges more masculine associated words, such as strong and durable. So I won't steal all her stuff here. She explains it far better than I, but I recommend you watch it on the link I'll make available here. So she presents a really strong argument that spoken language across different cultures affects our shared and individual knowledge. So, from my personal knowledge, my wife and I often have funny repartee over our own language differences. In Tagalog, language of the Philippines, one of them, A sounds like E. So there was one occasion I asked her what the difference between a raisin and a currant was. I still don't really know and haven't been duly bothered to Google that one. But she replied, and I won't do the accent here, but it sounded something like, recent is when it has happened recently, but current is when it is happening now. Okay, so it was that linguistic difference, totally different question. Likewise, we were once driving through the Philippines when she cried out, prawn zone, and I was looking for shrimp restaurants, but she was conscious of sharp bends in the road, leading it to be a prone zone. Similarly, my time in an Arabic country suggested different ways of learning knowledge through language. Egyptians read from right to left, and this impacted upon my students' ability to read my left to right English on the board and also in textbooks, and even to line up left to right in chronological exercises in my history classroom. There's an old TV show I used to really enjoy, which is probably a bit politically incorrect these days, called Mind Your Language. It's all on YouTube, worth having a look at. In one of the very first scenes, a British Pakistani citizen enters and announces, I am Ali, to which his tutor responds, no you're not, you're late. Crass humour, I'm sure, but it does show the central argument here that language can convey different meanings to different people. Likewise, I really recommend you listen to my absolute favourite performance poet, Daljit Nagra. His anthology, Look, We Have Come Into England, involves this young, intelligent, British-accented poet donning the Indian accent of his ancestors. He delivers his work with props and a bit of comedy, but then invites the question, why are you laughing? To audience members. And it can invite some uncomfortable, and some comfortable, I'm sure, truths. Truth, whatever that is, or at any rate knowledge, can be perceived differently through different spoken languages. Another of my absolute favourites is Hugh and Laurie, another UK comedy TV series, and there's a wonderful sketch in a police station where a citizen filing a report for a crime gives his name as a sound, to which the reporting officer simply fails to comprehend the knowledge given because of the language used. To take this further, I adore the TV presenter Susie Dent on the popular and long-standing UK TV show Countdown. She deals a lot with a real interest of mine, which is etymology or the history of words, and she comes up with some really fascinating language-based knowledge week after week. So whilst I enjoy phrases people use such as stinking rich, which came about because rich people in medieval Britain could afford to bury themselves in shallow graves inside churches, and the smell would often emanate up to the public, with the poor being buried outside. So if you were stinking rich, it meant you could afford to be buried in the church. I'm less secure when I hear phrases that have come from not so nice times in history, such as the phrase nitty-gritty. So in terms of language, nitty-gritty often is used as a term just to describe something you don't want to do, but actually it came from, it was alleged to have come from the rape of slaves, and the nits and the grit would be part of the act of rape that was committed. So different language, different meaning across time and space. So to bring it back to my personal experience, in Egypt when I worked there, a teacher friend of mine called a child a silly sausage when they made a trivial mistake in a cutting activity in primary school. In my country, the UK, that's a term of endearment. But in Muslim Cairo, it involved a meeting with a parent and a head teacher because sausage alluded to pig and all the cultural associations you can imagine with that. Likewise, the worst insult in Egypt that any two young boys could call each other was donkey. This would elicit fights between boys and was pretty much the worst thing you could say. But in the UK, donkey is a bit of a daft insult on par with silly Billy, but nothing major. So I hope I'm showing here that language is important in the knowledge we accrue and the way it is understood. Likewise, for me today, living here in Shanghai, the word Shanghai to me means fun and the bund and noodles and generally a good time. But to a British soldier, as a sailor in the 19th century, it meant to be kidnapped and to endure a year or two of servitude on a ship with no escape. So I'd love to hear more of your etymological twists and your language differences and stories, as I'm sure there are some great ones out there in all the languages you speak and the places and countries you work in. To give one last example, I'm a keen follower of cricket and football. Coleman balls refers to commentary faux pas. And when Ron Atkinson announced during a USA-Iran football match, and therefore a highly political game, these Iranians take no prisoners, that could be interpreted in very different meaningful ways. On a more comedic level, when cricket commentator Henry Blofield watched a cricket match between West Indian fast-bowling great Michael Holding and English batsman Peter Willey, his epic commentary was, "The batsman's holding, the bowler's Willie." Has the importance of the comma ever been so crucial, I wonder? But in all the above, I'm assuming language is written and also spoken. I'm sure there are many areas of body language we could consider too. As a history teacher, I know full well there's good reason that Nazi Germany's Adolf Hitler spent hours practicing his posture and arm gestures in front of mirrors, which Professor Ian Kershaw's photographic plates evidence. Body language expresses knowledge too, therefore. In Hitler's case, power, movement and unity, political points. One might look closer to Donald Trump, I'm not making the easy comparison alas, to see how easily he uses tone and body language, such as when he destroyed Jeb Bush, his rival, in his election victory, one of his rivals, in the USA to gain a contemporary parallel. Snowflake was and is one of my favourite words, but it means something totally different now under Donald Trump's regime than it did when I was a child praying to have a day off school in the 1980s in an icy British wintry Birmingham in the UK. Similarly, the V sign at Agincourt, that one, means a rather different thing to children's interpretations of it today, although defiance does run through both. To conclude this point on body language, I'd like to consider the use of Braille. How many of us really notice Braille markings on paving stones, approaching traffic lights and busy roads? Likewise, how many people would be interested in pornography, which is written in Braille? These are conceptual issues which will be used as great ins to help students consider the use of language to convey knowledge or information. So I hope so far in this section I've conveyed that I've perceived spoken, written and body language to be three areas that I see in terms of language which could impact on our shared and personal knowledge basis. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these, but I'll move on to the last bit of the video now. And I hope you have some questions or comments on some of the things I've mentioned about language as a way of knowing. So, section 3, further considerations. I'll finish this first video on language as a way of knowing or a wok, by exploring the unknown. What might happen in the future? Who am I to say that? It's just all guesswork. But it's reported languages are dwindling, and some estimates suggest we're losing up to one global language per week, and that by this rate, or that at this rate, half of global languages will be lost in 100 years. There's a Ricky Gervais joke on his XFM podcast about how Latin is now only really used in tattoo parlours. My brother has a tattoo, and it is indeed in Latin. Were this premise to come true, does that mean fewer languages means ways of knowledge will be shared more easily? I'm not sure. If so, why didn't Esperanto catch on? Years ago, when I worked in the UK, one of my colleagues couldn't read a student's mathematics answer. So they passed it around the department, but the comments were just totally illegible, and it scored a 0. The first answer the student wrote looked like Doce de Latte Dencorium, which they found entertaining because it sounded Latin. So they put out a little crest in their maths staff room, just as like a little office joke. Just a departmental giggle. And then a science teacher walked in once when I happened to be in the office, read it out loud, said, Doce de Latte Dencorium, Latin, very clever. And walked out pretending he could understand what it meant, and obviously it meant nothing. So needless to say, he was a bit of a pompous fool, but it conveys the point for this video. He pretended that language, which literally meant nothing, could be seen as conveying meaning. Years ago, I was lucky enough to watch Bangor University's Professor David Crystal at the Hay Festival in the UK, and he was talking about the impact text speak is having on the world, and he argued very effectively that it actually has very little. To take this further, are emojis just modern-day hieroglyphics? I once worked with a teacher in the UK who was chastised by a line manager for including a smiley face emoji in a professional email. Here in China, one of the few Chinese characters that I can recognise is the taxi symbol, because it looks like a man going home. And the rice character. To me, a starburst shape means the Union Jack, my flag, pride and nationalism, all those things. But in China, that symbol simply means rice. Have you ever misread a text? The irony of a joke? Or have you ever been offended by capital letters in a text or email and thought that person was shouting? How technology develops may therefore impact even more on language as a wok than how language itself develops. Food for thought, I hope. So, conclusions. I'm proud to be from the city of Birmingham in the UK, a city whose accent is often perceived to be rather stupid, as is, I think, the Tasmanian accent in Australia, I believe. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Tasmanians. But does that mean my points in this video are invalid, or they hold any less weight if I had a different accent? I hope not. And I hope you appreciate that this, from this point of view, and to go full circle on this, when my little girl eventually says her first words, I don't really care what they are, but what I do care about is the knowledge she will convey through them as she gets older, and hope she considers the meaning given to language by different people. William Shakespeare, world's greatest playwright, famously made up a lot of words, things like in a pickle, one of my favourites. So he would have been a really annoying Scrabble opponent, I suspect. But in this first video diary, when he argues, what's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. Apologies, English teachers, I might have paraphrased that. I disagree with him. Instead, I think language counts in our personal and shared knowledge. So thanks for listening, and I welcome your thoughts on any of these ramblings or other thoughts you've got about language as a wok or way of knowing, and thank you for taking the time to listen. Okay, signing off.